Hola, muy buenas a todos y bienvenidos a Cosas Militares. En el vídeo de hoy, en la entrevista de hoy, tenemos al gran JAKUB JANOVSKY, que ahora mismo es quien está gestionando las estadísticas de Oryx Blog, que siempre mencionamos en los informes y que estoy seguro de que muchos de vosotros pues estáis deseando conocer. So, let me introduce to Mr. JAKUB JANOVSKY, the manager of Oryx statistics at the moment, I think.
Yeah, hi.
So be welcome to Cosas Militares. Thank you very much for accepting the interview. And well, if you, the first question is about your professional background, right? So where do you come from in that sense?
Yeah, sure. So I live in Czech Republic and I work in telecommunications. As a disclosure, I have never been in the military, and most of my knowledge is based on my interest in military history and military equipment, and later interactions with other people in the open source community.
Now, on that part of your personal interests, were you interested on armored warfare, Cold War, World War II, or nothing like that?
Yeah, pretty much modern warfare, so World War II and later.
And I guess you started at Syria, civil war, right?
Yeah, when this civil war first in Libya started, I was mildly interested, but it didn't last all that long, and there weren't all that great sources consolidated yet. But later, when the civil war in Syria started, I actively started tracking events there, paid attention to what's going on where. And over time, I started first archiving footage, helping other open source intelligence people and community with archiving and other such effort, uh, partially due to my background in IT and telecommunication. And all that resulted in later starting with the analysis of some of the footage, identifying equipment and things like that, which over time turned into cooperation with Oryx. In 2020, we started cooperating on first articles that was about Turkish intervention in northern Syria, which stopped regime offensive into rebel-held territory. And later that year, we covered material losses in war in Nagorno-Karabakh between Armenia and Azerbaijan. After some time, Oryx asked me if I wanted to write some articles. That didn't actually result in anything because I'm not that great at writing. But in late 2021, based on released US intelligence and various other news about Russia concentrating equipment around Ukraine, we agreed that some kind of military conflict between Russia and Ukraine is likely. And ahead of time, myself and few others agreed to cooperate again on tracking equipment losses if the war starts.
Wow. And what about Syria? Now, I mean, at that time we were all watching all of those TOW missile strikes.
Yeah.
And, how the heck do you come to the conclusion to, okay, I'm going to count all of those?
Well, it started with first archiving all that footage. It started with ATGM shots and later expanded to all regime armor losses. And after while I started like counting everything, analyzing statistics and things like that. As a result of that, I have something like 3,600 or something like that regime armor losses in my archive, and similar crazy loss of rebel ATGM launches.
Wow. And what kind of personality features do you think somebody needs to do the kind of work you are doing? I mean, do you need to be very organized to be able to do teamwork or?
It really depends. For what I'm doing, you don't need to be that great at teamwork because at least outside of crazy huge conflicts like Russia versus Ukraine, it's usually doable, at least if you have some narrow specialization alone, or just cooperating with small number of people. At the same time, it obviously helps if you are a relatively easygoing person who is happy and competent to cooperating with others, especially if you might just specialize in one narrow field, but want to, let's say, expand your analysis outside of it. It helps a lot if you, for example, can get data from other people who have different specialization that can combine with your own data and your own analysis can significantly improve the usefulness of the result. At the same time, it doesn't require really anything special, just being reasonably smart, have time and patience up to the point. Because even I like, just bunch of trucks. I hate them. I actually told Oryx that if we ever start counting something resembling World War II, please don't count trucks.
No, don't do that.
Yeah. It's because it's not that it's some kind of a problem, but it increases the amount of time you have to pay attention to all that equipment, and I don't think they are all that interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah, like nothing special. Just have time, be willing to learn, be willing to talk to other people who might in some areas teach you something. In other areas, you might teach them something. All that, nothing special.
and I guess all of these well, for those of you who are joining us right now, this is we are with we could say Oryx, not exactly, but yeah, and he is now the one behind the statistics, right? The heart of
Yeah,
Oryx.
I'm the one currently updating the statistics. Steen, who started the blog, who lives in Netherlands, will soon retire, and he's not exactly giving media interviews. So
Yeah. Okay.
I am
So
I am the only member of the team who is willing to talk.
yeah, that's very pretty important, right? But so so you were already coordinated before the war started, right? So
Yeah.
from what phases have you went through during these almost 2 years, right?
Yeah. So first, I would highlight that just like most people, we expected this war to be fairly short, let's say a few weeks, few months at most. I was fairly optimistic about Russia screwing up and the Ukraine being far better prepared than was the consensus. So I assumed that Russia will take substantial losses and then walk away with some paper. Like Ukraine backing off on some minor issues and Russia declaring some glorious victory and returning home. At the end, it turned out that Putin is dumber than I assumed, and so the war has been going on. This essentially means that the initial phase of the war, let's say into early April, when Russia retreated from northern Ukraine, Kiev, Sumy, Chernihiv, etc. That was probably the most intensive part of the war for our work in terms of how much time we had to spend each day collecting all the footage and archiving it. But at the same time, one thing was easy at this time, and that was checking against duplicates, because it gets a hell of a lot more difficult if you have 600 destroyed BMP2s than if you have 15 of them.
Yeah, that's understandable. Yeah.
Yeah, and after that, on the war obviously switched to first Russian slow advance in the east, and as the summer progressed, Russia ran out of offensive power, and as we all know, in September Ukraine started two substantial offensives, one to liberate Kherson, which was fairly slow and protracted, but it achieved its result. And the second was the Kharkiv offensive, which during this war was the only blitzkrieg-like advance besides the first few days of when Russia attacked in areas where Ukraine didn't all that expected it. And at that time, there was a huge number of Russian losses from this offensive due to fairly chaotic retreat from Kharkiv Oblast that resulted in, for example, like 80 or 100 equipment losses being documented each day during the peak. And after that ended, around Battle of Liman, fighting switched mostly to infantry fights around Bakhmut, and again much slower pace of operations due to bad weather and both sides being tired and needing to reconstitute forces. After that, obviously, the infamous Russian winter offensive, especially around Vuhledar and a few other places, and grinding fight around Bakhmut, plus all that fighting before Ukraine started its current offensive. This part, I think, was fairly slow going as far as we were concerned, because there weren't like big offensive actions, so the rate of losses went down as before, and they again started spiking during the ongoing Ukraine offensives, where I would highlight especially the fact that Ukraine is concentrating a lot of effort and using a lot of guided munitions to especially suppress or destroy the Russian artillery force. And that's probably how I would split or show how we see the war so far.
All right. And so, for example, at the beginning of the war, I guess it would be mad, absolutely crazy to keep up with that work. How do you rest, or how? And two things. First, how do you rest if you rest? Second, how do you organize the work? Because you are a few guys and you don't want to get everybody on the same.
I'll first explain one thing. All of us are volunteers. We have our actual day jobs elsewhere, so we are doing this in our spare time when everyone has time. So
that answers this question. Yeah, ask it.
It helps in this regard that I essentially work 12-hour shifts in telecommunications job, so I have a fairly large number of days off where I can pay attention to just this, and not like going to work like 5 days a week or something like that. It definitely helps. Obviously, to make it more manageable, I stopped doing last year daily updates, and over time switched to updating the list just every 2 or 3 days. This helped a lot, especially with like stress about can I do it today, blah 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 blah, which over time became quite annoying because you had random events in your life where work, family, and other things interfered with those daily updates, and so I decided to back off a little bit, and when possible do them slightly less often.
And what about the team? How do you choose? Or I don't know if it was you who chose the team, or Oryx, or how do you choose who can collaborate, who has the skills, all of that?
So we started with the same team as when we were documenting losses in Nagorno-Karabakh, and over time we added some people who we are recognized as having required skill and patience to do this reliably, and who are obviously willing and able to do this day to day not like helping 2 days a month or something like that. And over time, some people scaled back their participation because of their work or family commitments and things like that. So we managed to balance things out, but obviously this is work we are doing for free in our spare time. There was some donation page, I think, on Patreon, but all those money were sent to Ukrainian, Syrian, etc. Humanitarian causes. And we are doing it as a hobby, which obviously is not entirely sustainable doing this for so long and so intensively. Like I'm spending easily 3-4 hours every day on this.
Wow. So let me tell them this in Spanish so some
Sure.
people, can understand. Bueno, pues lo que nos acaba de comentar en esencia es que invierte de 3 a 4 horas al día. Imaginaros que todos y cada uno de ellos son voluntarios, es decir, que esto es un hobby, no es un trabajo para ninguno de ellos, y que el único dinero que se percibe es a través de Patreon, ¿no? Entonces, de hecho, si queréis apoyarles, pues lo podéis hacer a través de Patreon, y ese dinero va directamente a organizaciones, ONGs de Ucrania, o sea que es todo para la beneficencia, podríamos decir. Okay, so really, thank you very much. Now, when you are doing this job, I guess sometimes you may have doubts on how do we classify this as damaged or destroyed, or so do you discuss that, or just you trust everyone? So if I think it's damaged, okay, it's damaged.
Generally, it's based on the consensus within the team. So if I have doubts about, let's say, if let's say artillery shell lands 5 meters from some not all that well armored vehicles, we will discuss: is this damaged or maybe destroyed? Because if you pepper some radar or electronic warfare equipment with few shrapnels, it's a write-off, no matter if the rest of the vehicle still exists. But we discuss things the same about some IDs, because often the footage is not of all that great quality, especially if it's like long distance drone footage. So we'll discuss the ID if we can establish it firmly, or for example list it as, let's say, unknown tank, unknown T-72, or some other such platform. And here I will highlight that all the footage and images is publicly available, and people can check it on our site as well as on the war spotting site, which has much better search than we do. Actually, we don't have anyone. And on the war spotting site, you can filter out based on many features, like vehicle is missing turret, or have let's say has a Z on it painted, and so on. So you can fairly efficiently filter losses in terms of checking against duplicates and things like that. And I encourage people, if they want, check those losses. Ukrainian, Russian, doesn't matter to us. If you think you have spotted any errors, we are happy to take a look at any evidence, ideally with some explanation why you think they are the same, if it's not completely clear. And sometimes people are right, sometimes people are wrong. But in general, we encourage people to give us this kind of feedback. It helps us further reduce the number of errors on the list, because with 15,000 equipment items on both sides by now, it's inevitable that some errors will slip by us.
That's it. That's normal, of course. And I don't know if you remember, one of our first conversations was about, that's why we came to speak, I think.
Yeah.
It was the tank-on-tank engagement on Syrian civil war, and how it was represented on statistics, right? Because it was more suppressive. You won't find that much evidence on that. So that comes from the statistical deviation that you expect. So for those of us who are using your data, what would you recommend us? What cartoons, what biases in the good sense, right? All, of course, I'm volunteer. Would you point us to? Okay, that's I would take care of this. And
yeah, I would highlight that often footage either from directly in the combat or aftermath is only part of what actually happened, and we have seen evidence of it in Ukraine much more often than in Syria due to the presence of drones and cell phones with good connectivity and things like that. Because often, for example, equipment, whether it's tank or artillery piece or something else, is first damaged or disabled by one weapon system. For example, it drives over the mine or it's disabled by anti-tank missiles, and only later it's actually destroyed by another weapon system, let's say artillery or troops who will find the damaged abandoned tank and can't recover it, so they will burn it down and things like that. So people need to be aware of the complexities of warfare, especially when things are not directly hit by like really powerful weapons. Like if GMLRS rocket lands on a tank or some other vehicle, it's completely gone. But most of the time you are not getting either direct hit or with substantially less powerful ammunition, so you need to take it into account. And if you see a wreck, be aware that even if you have some evidence of what caused some of the damage, it might not have resulted in complete destruction, and other weapon systems might have been involved. Obviously, both Russia and Ukraine are mostly posting videos of the other side's losses, not their own, at least not their ability. We have encountered obviously some cases where people were, hey, this is burned out Ukrainian tank, when the evidence was very clear to educate the person who knew what to look for, that it's actually a Russian tank. But usually when you have things like footage released by actual units after being cleared for OPSEC and other issues, it usually shows enemy losses. That's normal, and I would say there are often exaggerations in terms of like, hey, we destroyed this or that, but the footage will conclusively shown either only damaged or not being clear enough for us to add the claimed loss at all. And that especially happens when, for example, artillery shells land somewhere nearby. Maybe it was destroyed, but it's not visible on the footage. So that happens quite a lot. Also, people tend to sometimes deliberately, but in my opinion, mostly innocently, see another wreck and submit it as a new or potentially new loss, despite the already filmed. And there are deliberate misinformations.
do they saturate you with those?
So?
Do they saturate you? Do they send you
Yeah.
to?
Yeah, it obviously wastes our time. At least what helps is that most of those are like recent losses. In that case, we usually remember that I did this tank 2 days ago, so I'll just dismiss it in a few seconds. Worse is if it's, let's say, lost from a few months ago, and it's not all that clear, for example, about identification or things like that. But usually it's not too bad because on war spotting website, like I said, you can filter out by many parameters, and if you can identify the equipment, you can usually filter them out to reasonable number, rule out those in completely different areas, and you end up checking, let's say, against 20 racks or something like that, which is a lot more manageable in terms of time you spend on it than actually checking 600 burnt out BMPs. And I would say that while there have been cases of both sides quite deliberately reposting footage of the same loss from 15 different angles, especially from Russia. It has been notorious.
The
Both
leopard.
like we have seen those leopards probably like from at least 15 different angles and being submitted. No, this is definitely a new one, not the old one. Yeah, sure. So this complicates things, but most of the time, even those innocent reports are. Sometimes they waste our time. Sometimes they actually are helpful because, for example, they are close-up images that help us firmly establish ID. They might have additional information, for example, about the location, which originally was, let's say, just narrowed down to some region and things like that. So it doesn't always waste our time, and most of the deliberate efforts at the misinformation, like claiming additional losses and things like that, are not sophisticated enough to really be too wasteful of our time. We and sometimes it happens that we make a mistake, but usually mistakes are recognized and fixed like next day or within few days, when either someone from our team or somebody outside notifies us, hey, I think this is the same loss you have documented like a week ago or something. So very few of those errors actually stay on the website for more than a few weeks.
Well, so when you have to choose someone from the team, I mean, like if you have something very difficult, do you have like a hierarchy? Like, you are the best really at identifying tanks, or do you have that kind of specialization, or just everyone is?
Yeah. In with regards of some equipment, yes, there are some people who are way better than others, and for some specialized equipment like aircraft losses, there are other volunteers who help us occasionally, just about let's say helicopter wrecks and recognizing either what kind of helicopter or aircraft it was, and checking if it's the same as one of the already documented losses, which can be quite complicated, especially the ID part, because if I look at the remains of a crashed aircraft or helicopter, it looks like a pile of nothing to me. But there are people who will say, "Ha, I see this component, so this can be either this or that model of this aircraft or something like that." So I am happy to defer to them about specialized equipment.
Well, now, I wanted to ask you, like, on your experience, for example, Kharkiv offensive, or on the first 2 weeks of the war, how much of the losses are reported during the battle, and how many losses you find out after the battle? Do you have any sense of that? Like, nowadays with the offensive, we are watching this amount of numbers, so the true ones are like 20 or 30. Do you have any clue or of
Yeah,
that? Or
it's a guess, but I would say around half of the losses were reported immediately or reasonably quickly, and the rest was discovered over time, either because the footage of them wasn't sufficiently widely posted, so it took some time for either us to notice it or somebody to send it to us, or there are many cases
wow.
also of equipment that's found destroyed in remote areas, let's say forest and places like that, which are not accessible due to minefields, unexploded ammunitions, and other concerns like that. And as a result of that, we are still occasionally finding new losses from Battle of Kharkiv in September 2022, as an example. Or we have been finding new losses from Battle of Kiev for like 6+ months after the battle ended, just because of those mines and unexploded munitions preventing access of even military, let alone civilians, into the areas. And I am sure that there are still quite substantial areas, for example, around Izium, which are still not accessible due to the crazy amount of munitions and mines that were present, especially in areas that served as a flank of Russian units near Severodonetsk River. So I expect that even if, for example, tomorrow Russia left, there would still be months and months before we would essentially find everything or near everything.
So expect. Sorry, because I don't want to miss your point. But so are you telling me that the real numbers maybe double the ones we are already counting?
I'm generally split this in two areas. For frontline equipment, I expect that the real losses will be, let's say, 10-20% above what we have documented. For equipment that is in the rear, let's say command vehicles, trucks, and things like that, it could be easily double or more. I would also highlight that for some sensitive equipment, let's say electronic warfare equipment, radars, and things like that, those, even if destroyed, have decent chance of being removed from the battlefield by their owner. So if their destruction is not originally documented, they might end up in some pile of junk within Russia or somewhere in Ukraine, in Ukrainian case. And not be identified as additional losses, because especially when there are like local collection points for destroyed equipment, unless it's like really distinct and we can rule out it being one of the losses in the area, we can't add those to the list. Right? So as a result of that, we might be missing some losses just to try to avoid double counting. So I think this should also be accounted for in terms of the expectations of people seeing losses of some valuable equipment that might, let's say, have sensitive electronics or sensitive data. We have seen Russians and Ukrainians remove it from the battlefield, even if it was just completely charred wreck.
Wow. And so I can't resist to ask you this, from a tank geek to a tank geek. What you expect from the future of the tank, right? I am sorry, I know this is not strictly related to Oryx, but what do you think from what you are watching?
Well, from what I am seeing, it confirms what I felt for some time, that unless you are willing and able to absorb substantial losses in modern warfare, tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, and things like that need to have active protection system like Israeli Trophy or similar, so that you can at least minimize those losses to RPGs, ATGMs, and things like that. But those systems, as long as they have doctrinal role in various armies, they will be needed. But obviously, they will need to become more complex. At the same time, maybe their producers might be able to, for example, reduce the frontal armor thickness on tanks and things like that, and use that saved weight, for example, to reinforce roof armor, which currently is being often exploited by modern anti-tank missiles, drones, and things like that, which is exposing this quite significant weakness. But in some form or another, as long as they have a doctrinal role, this equipment will exist, probably in some smaller numbers due to the increased complexity and cost. But yeah, other than that, I don't see much of a choice, because if people complain about tanks being destroyed, okay, go try the assault with just infantry.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. You have to go to point A to point B through the ground, so you can choose if you go armored or unarmored.
Yeah, you might be happy to write off, let's say, 2 tanks and half a dozen infantry fighting vehicles, rather than writing off extra 50 troops. And especially in professional armies, those troops cost a lot to equip and train and all that. And even if you don't count the political cost of those casualties, like writing off some what is essentially an accounting item and replace a few tanks or IFVs is way easier than replacing experienced troops.
All right. And what about the numbers? Do you think it will be important, the quantity, let's say,
Yeah.
that factor? What do you think on that, on the Soviet philosophy of building tanks? Sorry, because I'm getting out, but I'm a tank geek. So.
I think quantities will be important, but I think it will be more important to correctly concentrate forces in areas where you want to achieve some significant result and effectively conduct combined arms warfare than the overall numbers. Because at least for defensive operations, we have seen in this war that you don't need all that many tanks. You still need quite a few infantry fighting vehicles and artillery, but on some equipment for defensive purposes, you can save a little bit for other operations. But from what we have seen, the really critical part and what is often responsible for a lot of losses on the offensive is lack of active protection systems and lack of effective combined arms operations. For example, we often see a very poor coordination between tanks and infantry, not enough smoke screen for assaulting troops, not enough engineering vehicles and equipment. So I would say that all those play a bigger role than whether you have, let's say, 200 tanks or 300 tanks. At the same time, it needs to be recognized that if you have just too few pieces of equipment, you will struggle. You might still be able to defend, for example, but you will have much harder time advancing anywhere or even counterattacking to limit your own territorial losses, for example. But it's complex topic, so yeah, it will depend on circumstances also, because if you have if it's conventional warfare and you have United States Air Force on your side, you can get away with having, let's say, much fewer equipment on the ground, because the US Air Force would wipe out, for example, Russian military, in my opinion, quite handily. It would still take, let's say, some weeks or months, but like it would be no contest. Ukraine has shown as much, especially in terms of completely pathetic performance of the Russian Air Force. Like those, and their logistics isn't all that great either. All those railways with railway bridges, railway stations, fixed logistics. If they ever went against the United States in conventional warfare, this infrastructure would cease to exist on day one due to cruise missiles and stealth bombers.
Yeah, that's well, but the US is something over everyone.
The United States military and especially Air Force is like a in-game cheat code in a real world.
Basically, it's a hacker. Yeah. Now, what about the? I guess in Syria we begin to realize there was already the seed of this kind of social media, bad climate, bad atmosphere. How have you feel the evolution of that in this war?
Yeah, I will start with saying that it has been incredibly helpful during this war that especially Western large social media companies are not inclined to like ban large accounts on official sites, unlike what we have seen in Syria, where mass reporting got various YouTube, Twitter, etc. accounts banned on both sides, which resulted in loss of a lot of footage that was posted previously. So that makes definitely it easier to track what's going on, not having to look constantly for what is the new account of this guy who was already banned 15 times.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that definitely helps, and obviously there is overall technological progress. It helps that both Ukraine and Russia, as well as Ukrainian supporters in the West, are more wealthy than Syrians and let's say Iraqis who were participating in that war. Because it gives them better access to technology, from smartphones to good connectivity, and obviously connectivity improvements in general. In 2012, like uploading some decent quality video was major effort for someone, and probably expanded their monthly allocation of data on cell phone if they didn't have access to fixed networks. But right now you have 3G, 4G, and even 5G. If not necessary on the front line, but even the frontline areas have equipment like Starlink terminals, where you can have a bunker near zero line with 100 megabit per second connectivity and latency low enough to play competitive StarCraft or Counter-Strike.
Yeah. Whoa. I meant like, do you feel a lot of pressure? I know that you get pretty attacked, right? Here we know that phenomenon too.
Yeah.
But does it affect you, or you just don't care? Sometimes it's like, oh, come on.
Well, at least me personally, it doesn't affect as much because pro-Russian fans are more dismissive than attacking us actively. It also helps to have such an insane Twitter block list that it doesn't even show me how many accounts I'm blocking.
Yeah.
So essentially, it's easier to filter out people on Twitter, where that's where I'm most of the time. And if somebody has some reasonable criticism, I engage them. If somebody is unreasonable or rude, I just block them, and I don't see them ever again.
All
That
right.
helps. But overall, pro-Assad people were a lot more aggressive in terms of personal attacks, death threats, and things like that. Well, pro-Russians are most like, oh, they are fake news, and blah 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 blah. So they are more dismissive than a problem, at least those that I still see.
Wow. Yeah, here we know that there is some respectful people, but there's a lot of who are, and what I hate is that when they tell you all such things without any kind of argument, like this is false, but they don't tell you why, or this is
yeah. And I especially like people who say Oryx is full of duplicate Russian laws. Okay, so post let's post which ones are duplicates. We'll be happy to check them. And somehow you never hear from those people again, like sending you actual content or where you might have made some error, because 99.9% of them are lazy idiots with no clue what they are doing, and not willing to spend time to even. There are errors on the list. I'm sure there are some, but they are too lazy to even go to the effort of actually finding at least few.
That's it. That's what I tell them sometimes. That it's like, okay, you think that there's a huge community of you talking about this. You could create your own Oryx blog and upload the photos, give us a link, and if it is good, we will use it, right?
Sure, that's true.
Finally, do you feel that your work is valued enough Do you think that journalists and even armies quote you as they should? What do you feel about your work being used by others?
We definitely feel that media appreciates our work, and we have gotten various comments from some people who work from various governments that they like our content. They sometimes also use it, and we have also discovered that some entities like to and people like to use our work without giving proper credit. But in most cases, people at least give us credit for when taking our numbers and statistics and things like that. So overall, I would say yes, but at the same time, I think if those governments truly appreciate this kind of effort, I think it would be appropriate to, on some institutional level, let's say EU or things like that, to actually set up some organization that would either directly or via grants would be funding people to be able to do this professionally and on sustainable basis. Because while for some of us it's not interesting as a job, for others it is. Uh, and if you offered like decent salary, ability to work for wherever you want, and things like that, I'm sure a lot more people would be interested in doing this kind of work, especially if they could get either institutional support for things like, let's say, proper databases, software licensing, access to satellite footage, which when you are doing it as a hobby, you are not exactly going to spend very often $500 to get a single satellite image.
You
Because
want an open source military intelligence unit, right, for everyone?
well, even if it was done, let's say, either as an actual employment on, let's say, EU open source intelligence agency
Cool.
or something like
Good
that,
luck with EU.
or let's say some such organization that would be giving grants to people who are doing already good work, so that they can do it as actual a job and, let's say, expand or gain access to things they can do. Because right now, if we, for example, wanted to do all this from start of the war, and we were like people with like actual budget and access to official, let's say, either free satellite imagery or even things like that, it would be incredibly helpful, and it would make the results of our work more reliable, easier to understand, easier to search, and all that. But at some point, money is needed for that. And for example, governments could help out also with a lot of this by, let's say, providing accounts or raw data when they are buying, let's say, satellite imagery from, let's say, Maxar or some other company. They are often giving contracts for tens of hundreds of millions of dollars or euros. I am sure that those contracts allow them to publish everything they want, or at least so much that they will never reach those thresholds. So taking a request from open source community or just posting some of the interesting imagery would not exactly kill them. Like, it wouldn't literally cost them anything extra, maybe some employee clicking a few times on some website. So things like that would, I think, help a lot. And even if it's like things, really basic things like counting what Russia actually had before the war, what it has now, a lot of that is essentially ordering satellite imagery of Russian storage bases, since they store a lot of the equipment, almost all of it, outside. So it's fairly easy to count, if you don't mind counting tens of thousands of pieces of junk. But somebody needs to either give you that imagery for free, or you need to buy it. So I think there are plenty of areas like this or elsewhere where governments can help the community, either for minimal expense to the government or even for free, relatively speaking. where it would encourage the people and allow them to concentrate their effort and money on things that are more critical. So yeah, I think there is a lot of space for improvements.
Because do you think that any real government intelligence agency military is doing this kind of job of also doing open source counting losses or not?
Well, historically, we know that government intelligence agencies never shied away from free and easily available information. I know for a fact that some government agencies have at least some level of effort of going into open source data and using it for various ways. So there is definitely aspect of that in civilian and especially military intelligence, but it obviously depends on government and on budgets, because some smaller agencies might simply not have enough people to dedicate a team or even a few individuals to something like that. And obviously, politicians are not usually the most progressive in this regard. So they might not be willing to, let's say, increase your budget by few million euros so that you can set up additional unit, because you can instead, I don't know, open a new school or something. And
Yeah,
I'm sure that politicians everywhere do the same. So.
yeah, absolutely,
But
absolutely.
I definitely know that some governments and intelligence agencies are doing extensive OSINT work. They just don't publish the result usually.
All right. Yeah, I would like. I'm not sure if I would trust that much that effort, because sometimes because they are secret, they look very shiny and impressive, but I
Yeah,
would like to.
yeah. From what I heard, some on paper really relatively well funded agencies are also completely useless at what they are doing. But it really varies from country to country. So you have one impressive agency or government apparatus in one place and completely use one next door with both having similar budgets. So it's
Yeah.
also a matter of attracting and keeping talent and all that. But yeah,
All right. Yeah. Maybe they are secretly competing with you each day, and you don't know about that. But
yeah.
okay.
Well, I will say it this way: I would be really shocked if, let's say, NSA, DIA, etc., wouldn't have like way better and more accurate information about who has what, who has lost what, etc. Because you can't really hide anything from them. They have too many talented people and too high a budget to miss at least most things.
I always say that reality is always creepier than it looks. So who knows?
Yeah, I'm sure that Google knows more about people than most intelligence agencies would ever dream about.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. So, well, I guess that's all. Do you have any kind of message we can call our audience to
Yeah,
support you at Patreon or whatever you want to
yeah,
say?
yeah. Actually, if people want to donate, they should just donate directly to Ukrainian causes. That's where we are sending our Patreon money anyway, with all the extra fees in between. So I would just tell people, if you think there are errors on the website, I encourage you to go over those lists. And if you find something, maybe you are right, maybe you are wrong, but we are definitely happy to check them out and take action if we conclude that you are correct. So while our work will never be perfect, we strive to document losses on both sides of the war, despite our personal preferences for who should win the war, which I'm sure isn't exactly a revelation, but we are definitely pro Ukraine.
Yeah, of course. I think we all know that, right?
Yeah,
And here I always say that I have a sympathy, of course, for the Ukrainian cause, right? So that's it.
yeah,
Thank you very much,
yeah.
Jakub. And you are free now. I will translate your last message. And really,
Yeah.
thank you very much for being here with us today. Maybe one day
Okay.
I call you to have a
Yeah,
chat
sure.
on time. Right?
Have a good day and bye bye.
Bye bye. Thank you very much.
Yeah. See ya.
Sí. Bueno, pues sé que muchos no habréis entendido nada, pero ha estado muy bien, me ha gustado mucho. Mirad, esta entrevista y todas de ahora en adelante las vamos a intentar doblar. No sé cuándo estará listo el doblaje de esta, pero la tendréis con voz en español, no solo los subtítulos, sino sobre todo la voz en español. Su último mensaje ha sido que, bueno, porque habíamos comentado de que ellos tienen un Patreon, pero si queréis apoyarles, pues lo que ha dicho es que directamente donéis a alguna causa relacionada con Ucrania, que es a donde va el dinero que ellos recaudan en Patreon. Por tanto, bueno, pues como ya sabéis, Jakub, pues es obvio que es claramente favorable a Ucrania, pero eso no le resta un ápice del valor al trabajo que hacen. Es lo que ha dicho, es decir, si encontráis un material, un carro de combate que no está computado en las bajas, y les hacéis el trabajo, entre comillas, de decirles, oye, he encontrado este vehículo, esto no está en vuestras bajas, ¿no? Lógicamente, cuanto más fácil se lo pongas, mejor. ¿Qué nos ha dicho? Que ellos revisan sobre todo unas 20 imágenes, ¿no? Como una muestra, lógicamente, de un T-72, pues si hay X, yo cojo los de ese periodo, los miro, veo que si coincide o no, si hay algún sospechoso. Pero si tú ves uno, te molestas un poco, le dices, oye, mira, yo creo que este puede ser este, por tanto lo tenéis por duplicado, y se lo dices, se lo das un poco mascado, pues ya está, esa es la manera más sencilla. Si lo bueno de ellos es que están abiertos a eso, entonces cualquiera que quiera eso puede hacerlo. Y luego también me ha parecido muy interesante lo que ha comentado, de que ellos esperan que, digamos, de lo que es el equipamiento del frente, con respecto a lo que ellos informan, hay un 20% más. Es decir, que las bajas que hay, súmales un 20% más en el frente. Equipamiento de retaguardia, hablaba de incluso el doble, de todo lo que tenga que ver, imagino, con guerra electrónica, puestos de mando, todo ese tipo de cosas. O sea, que nos ha dado unas claves, yo creo que bastante interesantes. Sé que mucha gente pues no entiende el inglés y no habrá podido seguir la entrevista, pero bueno, es lo que tiene, ¿no? Igual este fin de semana también tenemos a Michael Kaufman, lo cual es un doblete histórico, casi yo creo, para el canal. Pero bueno, ha sido un verdadero placer, como siempre, pues tener a la persona que nos ofrece la principal fuente y la mejor, sin ninguna duda, técnica de lo que sucede en la guerra de Ucrania. Mañana haremos informe de Ucrania y vamos a hablar de la situación más concreta de las distintas brigadas que han tomado parte en la contraofensiva, ¿no? Para ver pues, unir el desgaste. Pero por lo demás, espero, como siempre, que esto os haya gustado tantísimo como a mí. Me ha encantado la entrevista, ha sido un placer. Ashley dice, Yago, di aunque sea uno en español, que la tropa se está retirando de la línea, nos quedamos solos. A ver, el que no lo entienda, pues lo entiendo, que no se quede. Eso no pasa nada, es perfectamente normal. Pero ha sido muy interesante, muy interesante. Así que, bueno, pues lo dicho, yo os invito a seguir viendo Oryx, lo considero la mejor fuente de la guerra, como siempre hemos dicho. Y nada, pues espero que os haya resultado interesante el vídeo de hoy. Muchas gracias a todos, como siempre, por estar ahí. Y os espero el domingo en Political Room, si os queréis suscribir al webinar. Muchas gracias a todos por estar ahí y hasta otra. Un saludo a todos. A ver qué pongo. Os dejo aquí la...